The Brooklyn Nets are heading into this season with a little bit different expectations than they've had in the past couple of years. Now, certainly, yes, last year was not a year in which they headed in expecting to win the NBA championship, but they still had hopes of possibly making the playoffs or at least the play-in. And now you head into a season in which there's a new vibe about the team. And I'll be quite frankly honest with folks. I like the Brooklyn Nets situation they're in right now a lot better than they've been in the past few years. The reason I say that is, yes, it is cool to have these superstars on your roster, but let's look at it another way. Sean Marks was regarded as one of the best general managers and presidents of basketball operations in the entire NBA leading up to the Kevin Durant offseason. When Kevin Durant, Kyrie Irving, and James Harden came into play, his hands were pretty much tied behind his back, and the moves that he became famous for that got the team out of the pit of misery were tied behind his back, and he could no longer make the moves he wanted to go do. Well, when I looked at this offseason was, okay, nobody has that power any longer in Brooklyn. Cy, thankfully, had full trust in Sean Marks to be able to go make the moves in which he wanted to make. And I think that Brooklyn Nets fans should be excited about that. Not that Brooklyn Nets will be a contender by any stretch of the imagination this year. I don't know if they will even scratch the playoffs. But what Sean Marks did for this team in the franchise and turned them all around 5, 6, 7, 8 years ago now, there's no reason that this is not going to happen once again. And I look at all the moves that he made this offseason. It reminds me a lot of those Spencer Dinwiddie moves, those Joe Harris moves, the acquiration of D'Angelo Russell, the drafting of a Karis LeVert and Jared Allen in the 20s, getting a guy like Cam Thomas later on in the draft in the late first round pick. These were the type of moves I saw Sean Marks making. Going and hiring a coach that he liked and he wanted in Jordi Fernandez. I like where the Brooklyn Nets are heading. I think the culture will be back. And I think this is the team that's going to allow Sean Marks to cook up a good team again. And so, no, this year is not a year to go look at and say, hey, this team's going to be ultra competitive. But there is a future, and the future is much brighter now than it was before, in my opinion. So let's break down what this roster is looking like. At the point guard spot, you have an interesting battle there. And I don't really want to call it a battle yet because I think it's kind of clear that Dennis Schroeder will be the starting point guard to start the season. But you do have Ben Simmons in that point forward role, essentially, that you could say is competing. He will be the backup for the start of the season, I think. And I don't think he will be starting yet. But we will see exactly how he fills into this team overall. But obviously, that's going to be your duo right there. Let's head over to the shooting guard spot. Cam Thomas was on this show just a little bit over a year ago now. And he said, if I have the full opportunity, I could go average 25 points per game. Well, he got kind of close in a sense. We saw flashes of that potential. But he happened to have a coach that, let's be honest, hindered him quite a bit in Jacques Vaughn. And what I like to see is Jordi Fernandez came out and he talks about Cam Thomas. This seemed to be a bigger and larger embracement of Cam Thomas this time around. And that's what I like to see for your young players. Because there's an embracing of Cam Thomas now in Brooklyn where not only does Sean Marks and Josiah like him, but I think the head coach loves him. And he has a plan to let him thrive and be great. And when I look at this, I say, hey, Cam's already been a guy to average 20 points a game now. If he's in a good situation like it sounds like he's going to be in now, 25 points per game is not crazy to any stretch of the imagination. And I actually think that's very likely for this team. So you have Cam Thomas, who I think will have a mega season this year. He's going to be starting at shooting guard for you. And then you get to the small forward spot, Cam Johnson. I think he will be rounding out that spot right there. Banged up for a lot of last season. Good player. Remember his Phoenix days. Solid player. I think he's going to be starting there. And then you have an interesting battle here. There's a battle currently going on between Dorian Finney-Smith and Noah Clowney. To start the season, I think DFS will be the starter. However, Clowney is a guy that I'm very high on. I talked about it already. Sean Marks knows how to draft guys that have great potential and take time to develop. Clowney starting by the second half of the season would not shock me at all, especially obviously if DFS gets traded. But for now, I think Dorian Finney-Smith will be the starter, but you have a very, very good backup in Noah Clowney right there. And then you go to center. That's probably the easiest thing to look at the depth chart right now. You have Nic Claxton. They locked him in. Great move. He's still young. He's a great rim protector, one of the most underrated centers in the entire NBA. He's the starting center, and then backing him up is Day'Ron Sharpe, who I think is a very capable backup center. Let's go back up to the forward spot now, and you have a little bit of a battle there, kind of going between who's going to be the third string power forward for the team between Trent and Watford and Jalen Wilson. I have Jalen Wilson slotted above him. I like what I saw from Jalen Wilson last season. I think we could see him also compete for the small forwards positions and whatnot. But right now, those are the two guys I have backing up, Finney-Smith and Clowney. Then we will go back to the small forward spot. And you bring back Bojan Bogdanovic. For those that are Brooklyn fans, obviously know he is returning to Brooklyn. He was there for a long, long time ago, and he returns back now. Good veteran, can space the floor, good shooter. Obviously, he's older in his career now, later on to his later years, but it's cool to have him back in Brooklyn, see him there. But I alluded to this just a few moments ago. I said Sean Marks is back to making the Sean Marks type of trades. What do I mean by that? I mean the exact thing of what he did with Zaire Williams. Zaire Williams was a former lottery pick, did not pan out. We saw flashes here and there, very, very small flashes, but still extremely, extremely young. Never was going to get a larger opportunity now in Memphis, needed a change of scenery, and he was able to acquire him for pretty much nothing. That is very, very similar to how we rebuilt Brooklyn around the first time. And I love that addition there. Boyan is not a guy that's going to be part of this core. He might be here for the whole season, maybe not. He might get traded. But I think Zaire is going to be a guy we see possibly fill out and has a chance to make himself a part of this core going forward. Obviously, there's a lot to see this season. We don't know that for sure yet, but that's the type of move that Sean Marks used to make. And I love that addition for the Brooklyn Nets. So he's going to be slotting in there now to compete with Boyan for minutes at the small forward position. Then we go up to the shooting guard spot. You have Shake Milton, Dariq Whitehead, Keon Johnson. The way I have it shaken up right now is you have Shake Milton being the backup right there, and he's going to be the backup backcourt with Ben Simmons at this point in time. But remember, once again, Sean Marks drafts a lot of guys that people aren't very high on. Guys that once had a lot of potential, but for one reason or another, they slipped in the draft. That's Dariq Whitehead for you. Remember a guy, Karis LeVert? He's the guy that had a lot of injuries, was very, very talented in his early years in Michigan, could have been a higher pick, had all those injuries, and then slid to Brooklyn in the early first round, or mid-first round to late first round. Drafted him, and he became a core piece to that Brooklyn Nets team that rose up to being in the playoffs again. That reminds me of Dariq Whitehead. Foot injuries in college, foot injury in the NBA, has to sit a lot of the time in the beginning parts of his career, and now gets a larger opportunity possibly in Brooklyn. I'm excited to see. I know that Summer League didn't go as planned. I know he hasn't had extensive minutes, but you have to remember, he hasn't been healthy for a little over 2 years now. Try doing anything and taking 2 years off from it, and then see how you look when you come back. So there's going to be a lot of rust. That's why this team is young. They're not expected to win a lot of games. Let him get the rust off of him. I'm excited to see what is going to look like the second half of the season, because I think he has a lot of potential to be a guy that can be a part of this core as well. Keon Johnson, solid pickup there overall. Not too high on him. Just going to be rounding out this roster overall. So that's what you've currently got on this team right now that's locked in to the contracts. They have the full team locked in. Not going to see too many moves, I don't think, unless they decide to start trading guys. But here's what I want to say. I'm a big advocate for keeping veterans on young teams. When teams get away from adding veterans and just acquire an abundance of young players, the locker room turns very sour very quickly. There's a lot of issues. Development gets stunted, and a lot of other issues occur. You need veterans in this team. Now, they have an abundance of them. When you talk about having Dorian Finney-Smith, who's a legitimate veteran, Boyan Bogdanovic, who's a veteran, I consider Cam Johnson a veteran. Dennis Schroeder's obviously a veteran. Ben Simmons is a veteran at this point in time. So this opens up the door where Brooklyn has the chance to go make a few more moves. If they want to go and start acquiring more draft picks or whatever that is, whether it be early season or trade deadline, wouldn't be shocked to see that. The most clear one I'd say is Boyan. I could easily see them making that move. That makes the most sense to me. Dennis Schroeder as well. Both of those guys I could see making moves, but Finney-Smith as well. But you just have to see, keep some of those veterans there, make sure the locker room stays right, keep the development going. And I like what Brooklyn's doing overall. No, this team will not be competitive overall. Maybe they make a miracle run and go for a play-in game. But if I'm Brooklyn, I don't really want that to happen. And I say that because they're in an interesting stage. It's almost more like a retooling than it is a rebuilding for Brooklyn. I say that because when you rebuild, it's tearing everything down because you have nothing, you build it all the way back up. I just talked about Cam Thomas being a guy that I think can average 25 points per game in the right system. I said Nic Claxton is one of the most underrated centers in the entire NBA. I'd say he's a top 5 to 8 center in the NBA. You have him and he's still very, very young. Noah Clowney, I said, is a guy I'm very high on. Zaire Williams is a wild card that I think has a chance to have a lot of potential. Cam Johnson, we've already seen experience there. And then whatever you possibly acquire from the veterans you trade off. Also, you have Dariq Whitehead that could take a big jump this season. You have a lot of young pieces already in place. What are they missing? Maybe one more superstar on this team. Well, you do have your draft pick back this year. You have an abundance of draft picks over the next few years. What if you land the top picks this year? What if the Brooklyn Nets are able to go acquire Cooper Flagg? And for those, I'm one that studies the draft very well, and I also love Arius Bailey. I love a lot of these guys in this draft class. I think is going to be one of the better draft classes out there. Obviously, I don't know if it'll be as good as the Victor Wembanyama draft class, but it's going to be up there as a very, very good draft class. And so you have a chance to let Sean Marks, who is one of the best drafting GMs in the entire NBA, get a chance to draft a top pick in the NBA draft. That's a position I want the Brooklyn Nets to be in, because you have this young group, and if you add a Cooper Flag to this roster, it's a year or two out from being a legitimate contender. And you're in Brooklyn. Free agents want to come. And now, obviously, I'd say do not go after superstars, but I'm saying you could fill out a roster very easily by getting guys that fill and fit your team and your core group quite easily there. And so it's going to be interesting what they do. Keep veterans on the team throughout the majority of the season. See what you can acquire there. But the biggest thing, let these young guys ball out. Let them finally get to be coached the right way, develop the right way, and let Sean Marks cook and do what he wants to do. Let Jordy Fernandez get his feet wet a little bit, develop as a coach, get his core guys, learn how to coach this season, and get ready for a massive offseason next year, which you have a lot of cap space. You have potentially a top draft pick in the NBA draft next season, a loaded draft class, and already heading into the offseason with a great young core in place. And don't let anybody forget this as well. They also have one of the wealthiest owners in the NBA. When you have a guy like Josiah running your team, you're going to have a lot of good things possibly happen for your franchise. And with the new cap structure, only a handful of owners can really take on going over the cap in today's world. And so this new cap thing is basically hindering teams from being able to keep the young cores, even if they did it and built up the right way. It's not going to hinder Josiah that much, I don't think. So this team has a shot at being very, very competitive for a very long time if they can find the right guys that help them win a championship. And I think the Brooklyn Nets, as I said, are in a much better track record, a much better position than they were in a year ago.